Hello, welcome back to Learner's World. Today's video is going to be an intro to psychology. It's going to go over just a brief little history of psychology. So without further ado, let's get started. The early era. Psychology began as a deliberate attempt to start a new science. The sciences of astronomy, physics, chemistry, and biology developed gradually over the centuries. Psychology started in the late 1800s. Now, some important people in the field of psychology include Wilhelm Wundt. He was one of the two founders of psychology. He helped to establish psychology in Leipzig, Germany in 1879. He helped establish the first laboratory for psychological research. He developed and used introspection, and he searched for basic elements of psychology experience, such as sensations and feelings. So what is introspection? Introspection is a systematic, controlled process of examining one's thoughts and feelings to understand basic elements of consciousness. It is the idea that you are thinking about yourself. William James. He was born in 1842, and he died in 1910. He was the second founder of psychology. He was the first American psychologist. His primary focus was on functionalism and adaptation. He focused on what the mind does rather than what it is, which is known as function versus structure. Sigmund Freud. He created psychoanalysis, which is a therapy which explores the unconscious mind to understand and address emotional issues. Psychoanalysis became a popular approach for several decades and is the origins of modern clinical psychology. During the mid-1900s, most psychiatrists in the U.S. were following Freud's methods, though his influence in psychology has faded substantially. He was influenced by Joseph Breuer. John B. Watson. He was an early behaviorist, and a behaviorist is someone who studies or practices behaviorism, which is a theory of learning which emphasizes the role of an external environmental stimuli and consequences in shaping behavior. He lived from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. His focus was on observable behavior to see how much you can measure and control it. He created respondent or classical conditioning in humans. His most famous experiment was Little Albert. His study was inspired by Ivan Pavlov, and with this, he was able to prove Freud wrong. B.F. Skinner worked in behavior analysis and operant conditioning. He worked on the schedules of reinforcement aspect of operant conditioning. He was born in the 1910s and died in 1990. His influence in the psychology world is still seen today in behavioral therapies and organizational behavior management. Mimi Phipps Clark. She is known for the Clark doll test, where a white doll and a black doll were set on a table to see which one kids would grab. It showed that children were aware of racial identity by the age of 3. The results were used in the case of Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, and it showed that racial bias existed in psychological testing. Kenneth Clark. He exposed effects of internalized racism and segregation for African American children in Brown v. Board of Education. He was the first African American to be tenured full professor at the City College of New York, president of the APA, or American Psychological Association, and was appointed to New York State Board of Regents. What could you do with a psychology degree? So, one job you could get is a clinical psychologist. You'd need a PhD or doctorate in philosophy with a clinical emphasis, or a PsyD, doctorate in psychology, plus an internship. Ordinarily, it takes 5+ years after your undergrad degree, and a clinical psychologist deals with emotional difficulties. A psychiatrist, you'd need to have a medical degree plus a psychiatric residency. It takes a total of 8 years after getting an undergrad degree, and this is the one job in psychology where you would be prescribing medication. Counseling psychologist. Typically, it requires a PhD, PsyD, ED, or EdD, or a master's degree, plus supervised experience. Usually helps people to make important decisions. Clinical social worker. You need a master's degree plus 2 years of supervised experience. They provide mental health services, focus on assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of mental illnesses and emotional disorders. Board certified behavior analyst. It requires a master's degree plus 2 years of supervised experience. They use scientific methods to help people improve their behavior and develop skills. They often work with people who have developmental disabilities or autism and several other challenges. A biopsychologist. Their work is related to the relationship between the brain and behavior. It also is known as neuroscience. You typically need a PhD or PsyD. Cognitive psychologist. They specialize in memory and thinking and typically requires a PhD or a PsyD as well. Developmental psychologist. They focus on the change in behaviors over age. For example, biting of nails from infancy or being a toddler to adulthood. It typically requires a doctorate. Personality psychologist. Like the name suggests, they deal with personality aspects. It requires a doctorate degree and supervised clinical hours. Social psychologist. It focuses on group behavior and social influence. It requires a bachelor's degree, master's degree, or a doctoral degree, depending on the roles that the person may want to do. It also requires practical experience, and research internships are valuable for them. Environmental psychologist. It focuses on how factors like noise, heat, and crowding affect behavior. Typically requires a master's or doctoral degree. Evolutionary psychologist. It focuses on the evolutionary history of psychology. Typically requires a PhD. Human factor psychologist. It focuses on communication between person and machine. It requires a bachelor's degree in psychology, followed by a master's or doctorate degree specializing in human factors. Industrial organizational psychologist, aka organizational behavior management. That noise you were probably hearing in the background is my dog banging his tail on the door. Anyway, they focus on people at work, safety at work, and workflow optimization. It requires a master's or doctorate degree with relevant experience. Community psychologist. It focuses on organizations and social structures. Required to have at least a bachelor's degree for an entry-level job and a master's or doctorate degree for career advancement. Learning and motivational specialists. They focus on how humans and other species learn. A psychometrician. They measure the intelligence, personality, and interests. It requires a minimum of a master's degree. School psychology. They focus on problems that affect school children. It requires a master's or degree or a specialist level degree. An educational psychologist focus on the improvement of learning in school. Now, what are the typical earnings for some jobs in psychology? So, we have just a few of them. So, a psychiatrist would earn about $216,000 on average. On average, an industrial organizational psychologist would have about $105,000. Counseling psychologists would earn about $72,000 on average, and a school psychologist would earn about $58,000 on average. That's all I have for today's video. If there's something you want to learn more about in the future, please leave a comment below. And if you'd liked the video, please hit the thumbs up. And I hope you all have a great day.